Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Element in Architecture podcast. In this episode, we are going to be exploring another architecture, and this time we are going to be traveling back to New York City, and we are going to talk about the Highline, which is an architecture that I came to visit while I was in New York going to summer school. So I found this piece of architecture particularly interesting and, eye-catching because of a few features that I will be talking about in the following discussion about this architecture. But yeah, so in this episode, we're going to be deeply discussing some of the aspects about the Highline. So in the bustling heart of downtown New York City, where towering skyscrapers and incessant yellow taxis define the urban landscape, there is a winding greenway that defies the convention and transcends the ordinary. It is a place where concrete and steel harmoniously coexist with nature. That is, a highline elevated in the city that gives rise to both a natural oasis and an extraordinary urban experience. This is a place that stimulates the senses and invites all those who stroll along its paths to explore and connect with the vibrant and deeply ambient ecosystem of the bustling city. And all this while looking over the urban landscape in a serene environment. The Highline not only revitalizes the skyline of a city like New York, but it also reimagines the essence of what public spaces can truly be. So as a fusion of the artificial and the natural, New York's Highline is a public elevated linear park that not only adds ecological brilliance to the urban setting, but also transforms into a pedestrian realm amidst a city dominated by automobiles. So how did this pedestrian realm come to existence? I'll be talking about some of the key defining features of this piece of architecture that made it what it is. But first, we need to have a look at its history, since it's pretty important for this architecture. And we'll be talking about its industrial background and naturalization. So in the 20th century, the United States became an industrial powerhouse. New York was on its path to becoming a metropolis filled with skyscrapers as a result of this industrial growth. The Highline was originally conceived as part of New York City's freight transportation system, formerly known as the West Side Improvement Project. The Highline was constructed in 1930s, basically lifting hazardous freight trains onto elevated tracks above the streets of Manhattan's West Side. This innovative railway system, elevated above the city street, became known as the Highline. However, changes in the transportation industry over time rendered it basically obsolete and of no use. The rise of truck transportation and interstate highways in the United States made railway transportation systems such as the Highline increasingly outdated. And as a result of this, by the 1960s, the frequency of rail traffic on Highline plummeted, leading to its eventual abandonment. The final image was a series of steel structures elevated above the streets of New York for the Highline project. The structure of this track was left to the elements and gradually deteriorated from nature. However, people realized that this deterioration in nature and this sort of leaving this structure to nature was pretty prominent. However, in the early 21st century, a nonprofit organization called Friends of the Highline recognized the value of this abandoned elevated track and advocated for its preservation and reuse, basically transforming it into a public open space, a Highline Park or greenway. Friends of the Highline subsequently became the advocates of the so-called Highline Project, which, with the investment of the New York City government, has become reality in the near future. And that basically is the history of industrial history of the Highline Project. We can see that it was used as a it was used for an industrial purpose, and now it's revitalized to become something else through integrating it with nature. And now, speaking of integrating it with nature, we're going to be talking about its ecological configuration next. So the entire Highline Park spans a length of 2.33 kilometers, curving from Gansevoort Street at 30th Street to the west, ultimately reaching 34th Street. Along this elevated path, there are over 12 entrances. This elevated structure in the west side of New York is essentially a green park, equivalent to an ecological greenway. And that is basically the basic information about the Highline Park. And when since we're discussing the nature, it is important to begin with its natural landscape. The planting and ecosystem on the Highline are inspired by the concept of plants naturally growing in the abandoned tracks. So if you imagine if there are cracks on the ground, you can basically, after a lot of time, see some plants growing out of it. And that's the central idea of the Highline Project, which is to integrate the artificial railways with nature by letting the plants grow from the tracks, and at the same time helping the plants grow artificially. So this concept is realized by allowing plants to permeate the separated stone pavement on the elevated road, allowing vegetation to gradually invade the gaps between the tracks and basically form its own ecosystem. This integration of nature and artificial architecture is depicted with seamless harmony, going beyond the concept of weeds growing from the tracks. And the landscape designers of this project adopted a technique called surface digitalization to create a discrete paving design. As the hard surfaces gradually form linear soil gaps, plants are allowed to grow along these linear trajectories, creating a natural and seamless connection between vegetation and pathways. The tapered ends of these elongated paving units connect to the planting beds, which creates a textured landscape with undefined paths, allowing pedestrians to roam freely on the Highline. Furthermore, this digitized visual effect also mirrors the traces of the abandoned tracks. The greenery between the parallel lines produces the texture of track parallel lines, and basically it's sort of the digitalized greenery basically is a mirror of the industrial ruins of the tracks. And so this digitalized plant configuration can be seen as a natural simulation of the artificial tracks, showcasing the designer's use of natural composition to pave the way for artificial architecture. In addition to that, most of the tracks have been reconstructed and restored to their original positions, serving as integrated planting blocks. This connection and integration of ecology with pathway tracks can demonstrate the true underlying concept of greenery or naturalization, transforming the artificial architecture into a more ecological state. The Highline serves as a prime example of this fusion. It utilizes basically existing industrial structures to develop ecosystem and green areas, fully demonstrating the integration of nature and with artificial architecture. It also represents a solution to the global issue of reusing idle public spaces and then transforming the outdated infrastructure by preserving its nature and integrating it with nature. Now, not only does the Highline have ecological configurations that gives it this key aspect of integration of artificial with nature, it also has some pretty sensory and human-centric designs. So to enhance the ecological experience, these designers of this project adopted soothing and human-centric designs to create a sense of tranquility and relaxation within the ecosystem. The dilapidated surfaces of the steel tracks and structures subtly alludes to the artificial industrial architecture, while the park above, conquered by ecology, adds a greenway to the industrialized urban landscape of New York. So this exudes a tranquil atmosphere of ecology and the scent of nature distinct from the bustling city below. And through the linear park, there are benches and rest areas provided for pedestrians. Furthermore, the designers used gentle LED lighting to illuminate the park's pathways, allowing pedestrians' eyes to adjust to the ambient lighting of the surrounding city sky, while the lighting under the elevated bridge provides illumination for the sidewalks below. So based on this, we can tell that the sensory and human-centric designs is also basically centralized around the idea of nature and artificial aspects. So we can see that all of these ecological aspects at the top and at the bottom of the Highline basically mirrors a fusion between nature and the artificial elements, and that all of these sensory aspects are basically created along the lines of this integration. So basically, in this episode, we talked about how the Highline, first of all, is a transformation from the old industrialized architecture into a new ecological or natural revitalized piece of architecture. And then we also talked about how its ecological configuration is particularly amazing. And then we basically talked about the sensory aspects that is built along the lines of this integration between artificial elements and nature. So in conclusion, the Highline represents a true fusion of the built environment and the natural world. Its carefully designed structure allows visitors to seamlessly traverse a landscape where architectural elements interweave effortlessly into a thriving green space. However, the Highline is not merely a visual spectacle. It is a symphony of these senses. Perhaps most importantly, the Highline is a welcoming refuge for pedestrians. It is not just an architectural marvel. It is intricately connected to the rejuvenation of a city's soul and community-driven revitalization. And thank you for this episode. I had a really fun time talking about the Highline, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.